Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to share and subscribe the channel. I was bred for war, yet you treat me like I'm fragile. Why, human? Welcome to the world of science fiction. Comment below, where in the world are you watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The air on Torvak 6 was thick with a scent of scorched metal and blood. Rava moved with precision, her violet eyes scanning the ruins ahead. Her team followed in tight formation, weapons at the ready. Their movements, eerily synchronized, were engineered for war, trained to function as a singular force, and they never hesitated. Their mission was simple: eliminate the Dracen outpost and extract vital intelligence. It should have been an easy strike, another calculated victory in the war that had shaped her existence, but something felt wrong. She flicked her fingers in silent command, signaling her second-in-command to advance and scan for anomalies. They had done this 1,000 times before: advance, eliminate, move on. But as they stepped into the ruined compound, the silence pressed against her like a tangible weight. No guards, no movement. Then, boom! The explosion was instant, the shock wave sending her team sprawling. Rava barely had time to react before enemy fire erupted from all sides. The ruins came alive with Dren soldiers, their energy rifles spitting death in rapid succession. Her men moved like well-oiled machines, returning fire in perfect coordination, but they had been set up. We were expected. Rava dove into cover, her mind calculating a way out. The mission was compromised, a retreat was necessary. She barked the order, but the only response was gunfire and screams. Then, pain, a searing shot to her side. Her body reacted before her mind could catch up, her enhanced physiology dulling the pain as she twisted away, taking down 2 Dracen with precise headshots. But her movements were slowing, the wound was bad. Another explosion rocked the ground beneath her. She caught a glimpse of her squad, what was left of them, falling one by one, and then she was alone, bleeding, wounded. The Dren commander's voice crackled over an unseen loudspeaker. Rava of the Zenith Division, the infamous ghost of the battlefield, how does it feel to bleed? She didn't answer, she was already moving, her vision blurring as she activated her cloaking module. The shadows welcomed her as she slipped into the ruined corridors of the compound, leaving behind the corpses of her team. She needed to escape, regroup. The Zenith Division didn't tolerate failure, and she wasn't about to die here, in the dirt, hunted like a common soldier. But her body was failing, she was losing blood fast. Her calories crackled, then cut out completely. Jammed, she stumbled through the wreckage, her mind fighting the creeping edges of unconsciousness. She needed cover, needed to get out of sight before the Drakens sent their hounds after her. She forced herself forward, pushing through the agony until she collapsed behind a half-buried transport wreck. She forced her breathing to slow, pressing her hand against her wound, the bleeding wasn't stopping. She was trapped, wounded, alone. And then a shadow moved nearby. She snapped to attention, gun raised despite the shaking in her hands. But what she saw wasn't Dracen, it was a human, a soldier. No, a medic, dressed in blood-stained fatigues. His rifle was slung over his shoulder, but his hands were empty. He wasn't a threat, she could kill him easily, take his supplies, use his gear to stop the bleeding and continue her mission. Yet the moment he saw her, he didn't reach for a weapon. Instead, he knelt beside her. "Damn," he muttered, eyes scanning her wound. "You're lucky I found you." Rava stared at him. She had faced warriors bred for slaughter, machines designed for destruction, and this human, this fragile organic being, looked at her with neither fear nor hatred, only concern. Her fingers twitched against the trigger, one shot, that was all it would take. But when his hands gently pressed against her wound, she froze. His touch was warm, gentle, and for the first time in her life, she didn't know what to do. Rava's body tensed the moment his hands touched her wound, an involuntary reaction honed by years of conditioning, as pain flared through her side, a reminder of her weakness, of her failure. Yet what truly unsettled her was the gentleness of his touch. It was unnatural, foreign. She had been built for war, programmed to withstand pain and push forward even as her body tore itself apart, and yet here were his hands, pressing against her injury with a deliberate care that made her skin burn in ways that had nothing to do with the wound itself. She should have broken his wrist. Her instincts screamed at her to react, to kill, to eliminate the variable, but she hesitated, her fingers twitching against the trigger of her sidearm. He wasn't acting like a soldier. He wasn't trying to restrain her, capture her, or claim her as a prize. He was treating her as if she were something fragile, something worth saving, and that confused her more than anything else. "Stay still," he murmured, his voice steady and calm, as if he weren't kneeling next to a weaponized killer who could rip his throat out in an instant. He wasn't even watching her, his hands weren't afraid. It made no sense. She should have been terrified, should have been cautious. Instead, he was focused entirely on her wound, his brow furrowed in concentration as he pulled a small medical kit from his belt. She could hear the soft rip of sterilized packaging, the faint metallic clink of instruments, and the steady sound of his breathing. He moved with practiced efficiency, as if he had done this 1,000 times before, but never on someone like her. Rava gritted her teeth as he began working. The sting of antiseptic bit into her skin. Her body was fighting to heal, her enhanced physiology already working to repair the damage, but she wasn't invincible. She knew the shot had been well placed, designed not to kill but to slow her down, so the enemy could capture her alive. The Dracen wanted her back, and that meant this wound would get worse if left untreated. She hated that. She needed help. She hated that she couldn't just walk away and finish what she started. Yet what she hated most was how easily he touched her, how unafraid he seemed of the weapon. "You're lucky," he said, voice low as he worked. "The round missed any major organs. You'll live, but you won't be moving at full speed for a while." He glanced up, his eyes meeting hers, and for a moment, she forgot how to breathe. His gaze wasn't calculating or cold, it wasn't the look of a soldier assessing a threat, it was deep, human, and searching, filled with something she couldn't name. She should have killed him, should have ended this moment before it had a chance to exist, but she didn't. Instead, she found herself watching him, observing the way his hands moved, the way his fingers pressed just firmly enough to staunch the bleeding, but never more than necessary. There was no cruelty in his touch, no harsh brutality, it was different. Wrong, Rava thought. She had been trained to see humans as weak, fragile things, creatures that burned bright and fast before fading into nothing. But this one, this Leo Carter, wasn't weak. He had survived the ambush, risked exposure to help her, and now, despite the danger and the fact that she could end his life in seconds, he was still here tending to her wounds, as if she were anything but the weapon she was designed to be. He secured the bandage tightly, pressing his palm over her wound to apply pressure. Rava didn't flinch. She had been shot, burned, and broken before, had suffered worse in the name of war, but this was different. The warmth of his hand seeped through her skin, and for a fleeting second, she didn't feel like a soldier, she felt something else. She shoved the thought away before it could take root. "This is a bad spot to rest," he muttered, glancing around. His posture shifted slightly, the tension in his muscles betraying the exhaustion beneath his movements. He wasn't unscathed, his uniform was torn, his own blood staining the fabric near his shoulder. He had taken a hit too, but he had ignored it to tend to her first. "Why? What possible reason could you have to prioritize me over yourself?" Rava exhaled slowly, forcing herself to speak despite the dull ache in her ribs. "You should be afraid of me." Her voice was rough, the words edged with warning, yet there was no threat, only confusion. Leo didn't react as expected. He didn't stiffen, didn't reach for a weapon, and didn't look at her like a monster. Instead, he huffed a quiet laugh, shaking his head as if she had just said something ridiculous. "Should I?" he said as he leaned back, wiping his bloodied hands on his pants before running one through his messy brown hair. "You're hurt. I'm a medic. This is what I do." That answer wasn't good enough. You don't know what I am, she insisted. At that, his lips quirked upward, barely a smile but something close. You're bleeding, that's usually a sign you're not invincible. Her fingers tightened around her sidearm, frustration burning in her chest. This human, this foolish, reckless idiot, was sitting in the middle of a war zone, bleeding and exhausted, and still had the audacity to treat her like she was normal. She wasn't normal, she had been created for one purpose, and one purpose alone, to destroy, to win. Her existence was a carefully calculated weapon, and yet he didn't seem to care. Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Leo pushed himself to his feet, exhaling tiredly. Look, I don't know who you are, and honestly, I don't care right now. What I do know is that we're both stranded in enemy territory, no backup, no supplies, and if we don't work together, we're going to die out here. He reached for his pack, slinging it over his shoulder before extending a hand to her. So, what's it going to be? You want to keep playing the lone wolf act, or are we getting the hell out of here? Rava stared at his offered hand. He was offering trust, something no one had ever given her freely. She should have walked away, should have ignored him, should have left him to fend for himself. But before she even knew why, she took his hand. Rava regretted that moment, the moment their skin made contact, but it was too late to take it back. His grip was firm but not forceful, steady but not demanding, and she could feel the heat of his skin against hers, something she had never allowed herself to focus on before. She was used to precision, to calculated movement, every action having a clear purpose. But this was instinctual. He pulled her up carefully, as if he expected her to collapse, and that alone irritated her. She was not weak. She was not fragile. Yet the moment she was upright, the world tilted slightly, and her vision dimmed for a fraction of a second before stabilizing. Leo noticed, of course. His brows knit together in that infuriatingly concerned way as his eyes scanned her face, checking for further injuries. He didn't say anything, but the slight way his hand hovered near her arm, as if he expected her to fall, made something in her chest tighten uncomfortably. She hated it. No one had ever looked at her like that. I'm fine, she snapped, harsher than intended, yanking her hand away and stepping back to put space between them. He let her go without protest, but his gaze lingered just long enough to make her feel exposed. She didn't like how easily he read her, how he seemed to see past the armor, past the weapon she had been forged into. It made her uneasy, as if she had stepped onto unstable ground. Leo exhaled through his nose, adjusting the strap of his medical pack. Right, sure, you're fine. You just took a high-caliber round to the side, lost half a pint of blood, and almost blacked out, but yeah, let's pretend you're good to go. His words weren't mocking, they were dry and laced with something she couldn't quite place. He turned away before she could respond, his focus shifting to the wreckage around them. We can't stay here, he said. If the DRA were waiting for your squad, they'll send out patrols to sweep the area. We need to move before they find us. Rava clenched her jaw, irritated by his tone but unable to argue, he was right. She wasn't at her best, and the enemy wouldn't stop hunting her just because she had a human problem to deal with. Glancing around, she recalculated their best course of action. The Dren forces had surrounded the compound when the ambush was triggered, meaning their perimeter was strongest near the ruins. But if they moved west toward the wreckage fields, they could use the terrain to cover their escape. It was a gamble, but it was their only option. West, she said, already taking the lead, ignoring the discomfort in her side. She refused to show weakness, especially in front of him. There's a wreckage field 2 clicks out. We move fast, we can avoid their sweeps. Leo didn't argue, but she caught a brief flicker of amusement in his expression, as if he had expected her to take charge, as if he was letting her. It made her want to punch him. They moved quickly, keeping low as they weaved through the rubble, the distant sound of DRA and patrols echoing in the distance. Rava's mind stayed sharp, scanning every shadow and every shift in the air, her instincts tuned to detect even the smallest change in the battlefield. Yet, even as she pressed on, she could feel the dull, nagging pain from her wound slowing her down. She wasn't limping, not yet, but she knew Leo noticed. He stayed close, his presence an almost constant weight at her side. Always just within reach, never overstepping. That was another thing she didn't understand about him. He didn't push, he didn't prod her with questions or demand explanations about what she was. Any other soldier would have tried to use her, feared her, or sought to control her. But Leo just kept moving silently, focused on survival rather than the mysteries she carried. They reached the edge of the wreckage field just as the first DRA and patrol circled back toward the compound. Rava pressed herself against a shattered piece of hull plating, watching as the enemy scanned the ruins with precise, methodical movements. The Dracen wasted no time with careless searches. They had tracking units, aerial drones, and no hesitation when it came to executing stragglers if caught. Leo wouldn't make it, she could escape if she left him behind, that was the truth. Even injured, she could take the risk, slip past the patrols, and disappear into the ruins. She had done it before. But as she glanced at him, watching the calm way he assessed the enemy's movements, something inside her hesitated. "You're thinking too hard," Leo muttered under his breath, not looking at her. "That's a dangerous habit." She frowned. "What are you talking about?" "You're looking at me like you're deciding whether or not to leave me behind." "If you're going to do it, just do it, no hard feelings," he replied, his voice frustratingly casual. The sheer audacity of his statement made something snap in her. She turned to him fully, narrowing her eyes. "You think I would just abandon you?" He finally looked at her, his gaze unreadable. "I think you don't know what to do with me." That struck deeper than she wanted to admit. She inhaled sharply, tearing her gaze away from him and refocusing on the enemy movements. He wasn't wrong, she didn't know what to do with him. She didn't know why she hadn't left him already, why she was still choosing to keep him alive when he was nothing but a liability. Maybe it was because she owed him for the wound. Maybe it was because she was too weak right now to make the smarter decision. Or perhaps it was because something in her simply didn't want to leave him behind. "Survival first, we move," she said when the next patrol crossed east, her voice steady. "Stay close, stay quiet, and try not to get shot." Leo snorted softly, shaking his head. "You say that like I enjoy getting shot." She ignored him, counting the seconds as the patrol shifted. The moment they turned their backs, she moved fast and silent, her body a blur as she sprinted through the wreckage. Leo was right behind her, keeping pace despite his lack of enhancements, his movements smooth and practiced. He wasn't just some medic, he had training, experience. He wasn't as fragile as she had assumed. They reached cover just as the patrol doubled back, slipping into the shadows of a collapsed structure. Rava could hear the faint hum of aerial drones overhead, but for now, they remained undetected. For now, Leo exhaled slowly beside her. "You really don't talk much, huh?" She glanced at him, a faint flicker of amusement tugging at her chest. "I talk when I need to." He smirked. "So what? I just need to keep you injured to get conversation out of you." She narrowed her eyes, but for the first time since the ambush, the tension in her chest felt lighter. They weren't safe, not yet, but at least they were still alive. Night settled over the wreckage field like a heavy shroud, cloaking the ruins in thick shadows and distant echoes of war. Rava and Leo moved cautiously through the twisted remains of downed ships and crumbling structures, their footsteps light, their bodies tense with the constant awareness that death could be waiting around any corner. Every few steps, her injured side reminded her of her weakness, a dull ache radiating despite the hasty field dressing. She hated the sluggishness, the way her body didn't respond as sharply as it should. She wasn't built to falter, yet here she was, moving slower than she liked. What irritated her most was that Leo noticed. He hadn't said anything, but she could feel his gaze lingering on her whenever they stopped, subtle concern that made her want to snap at him. He wasn't a soldier like her, yet he was there, watching her back, as if expecting trouble at any moment. They were far from equals. Leo ducked behind a slab of fallen metal and gestured for her to follow. She crouched beside him, ignoring the protest of her muscles and keeping her breathing measured. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small, thin ration bar, breaking it in half before holding out a piece. Without looking, she stared at it. Her instinct was to refuse. She didn't need his charity, she had been conditioned to endure starvation if necessary, to function without food longer than any normal soldier. Yet as her body reminded her of lost blood, she realized it would be foolish to ignore the simple logic of staying fueled. Slowly, she reached out and took it, their fingers brushing for a fraction of a second before she quickly withdrew and stuffed the food into her mouth without another word. Leo smirked as he chewed his own half in silence. For a moment, the battlefield, the distant gunfire, the hum of drones, blurred into something distant, less immediate than the strange quiet between them. Rava didn't know what to make of it. She had spent her life surrounded by soldiers who spoke only in orders, functioning as mere parts of a war machine. To her, silence had always meant calculation, waiting for the next move. But now the silence felt different, steady, comfortable, and unsettling all at once. Leo finished chewing and leaned back against the wreckage, stretching his arms above his head before exhaling. "So, I figure we should probably talk about the part where you're not exactly human," he said, his voice low enough not to carry. Rava stiffened, her fingers twitching instinctively toward her weapon, but she forced herself to remain still and listen. He wasn't accusing her, his tone was matter-of-fact, without fear or judgment, the kind she'd come to expect when someone discovered what she truly was. "You just figured that out, now?" he said, giving her a lopsided smirk that lacked its usual teasing edge. "I had my suspicions the moment you got shot and didn't go into shock, then there was the whole not flinching when I touched your wound thing, and oh yeah, the way you move like you're straight out of some Black Ops nightmare training program." He gestured vaguely at her. "Not to mention the glowing eyes, the tail, the fact that you don't seem to sleep or eat like a normal person. Yeah, kind of tipped me off." She watched him carefully, waiting for fear to settle into his expression, for the inevitable realization that he was sitting next to something designed to kill, but it never came. He looked at her, curious yet unafraid, as if he were studying a person and not a weapon. Unsure of what to do with that, she finally said, "So?" He rolled his shoulders and replied, "I don't really care what you are. You're not trying to kill me, and that's good enough for me." Rava blinked, that was not the reaction she had expected. "You should be afraid of me," she stated, not as a warning, but as a fact. Leo arched a brow. "Should I?" "Yes," he exhaled, shaking his head. "See, I don't think so. I think you want me to be afraid of you because it makes things easier, because then I'd just see you as some unstoppable monster instead of." He stopped himself before finishing, running a hand through his hair before sighing, "Look, I get it. You've spent your whole life being treated like a weapon. I'm guessing no one's ever seen you as a person before. That sucks, but I'm not going to tiptoe around you just because you think that's what I'm supposed to do." Rava clenched her jaw, anger and something else twisting within her. "Why are you like this? Why aren't you afraid? Why aren't you treating me like the living weapon I was designed to be?" She should have snapped back, should have reminded him exactly what she was, but the words caught in her throat. Part of her did not want to hear fear in his voice, having heard it too many times before. Before she could continue, a sudden burst of static crackled through the air, followed by the distant sound of shouting and mechanical roars. Both went rigid, their instincts kicking in as they turned toward the source. Patrol drones were closing in fast. Rava immediately scanned the wreckage, assessing possible exits. They had only seconds before the drones reached them, and that wasn't even accounting for the ground forces that would follow. No words were needed, Leo was already moving, following her lead as they darted between the jagged metal remains of a once great war machine, keeping low and avoiding open ground. A searchlight passed over them, and they froze. Rava pulled Leo against the wreckage, pressing him into the shadows as her body tensed, the beam lingered just a few meters away. She could feel his breath against her neck and hear the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath the adrenaline. He did not tremble or panic, he simply waited. When the light shifted and the drone moved on, she did not immediately release him. For a moment, just a moment, she realized how close they were, how his body fit against hers in a way that felt too natural. Then, as quickly as the moment came, she stepped back, pushing him ahead without a word. Leo didn't comment, but she sensed a smirk on his face before she even saw it. "See," he whispered as they moved again. "We make a good team." Rava did not answer, but for the first time, she didn't disagree. Outside, the ruins stretched before them, jagged skeletons of war machines and crumbling structures casting long, fractured shadows under the dim glow of distant fires. The battlefield had long since gone quiet, but silence never meant safety. Rava moved ahead, scanning for threats, her body instinctively anticipating the next fight. Even weakened, even with her side burning from the wound, she was still faster than him and more aware of the unseen dangers lurking in the dark. Leo followed close, his footfalls deliberate and careful, as if he understood how much depended on not being heard. He was human, painfully so, but he wasn't clumsy, didn't stumble, and he didn't hesitate. He was different from the soldiers she had fought alongside before. He wasn't afraid, and that alone irritated her. She should have welcomed his courage, appreciated that he wasn't dead weight slowing her down, yet the ease with which he adapted to her presence and treated the situation like just another bad mission got under her skin. Humans were supposed to fear her, not adapt to her. And yet Leo had already decided she wasn't something to fear at all. Exhaling slowly, Rava forced her focus back to their next objective. They needed a new plan. The wreckage field had bought them time, but it wouldn't last. The Dren were thorough, and once they realized she had survived the ambush, they'd send out tracking teams, hunters, drones designed to pick up even the faintest energy signature. They had every advantage, resources, numbers, even air support. She had been on the other side of that equation too many times to believe they would get lucky. Leo shifted beside her, leaning against a slab of broken metal as he pulled out a small handheld scanner from his pack. The screen flickered faintly in the dark, throwing soft green light on his face as he checked for enemy signals. His brow furrowed, then he muttered a quiet curse, "Looks like we've got company." He turned the scanner toward her. A cluster of red blips pulsed on the display, moving in a slow but deliberate search pattern. They weren't rushing, which meant they knew she was alive, they were hunting. Rava clenched her jaw, weighing their options. How long until they reach this position? Maybe 20 minutes, if we keep our current pace, Leo replied, shutting off the scanner before the signal could be detected. Unless we deploy drones. He glanced at her, measuring her expression, then sighed. You already have a plan, don't you? She did. It was reckless, risky as hell, but it's our only shot. There's an abandoned supply cache buried under the old outpost, 3 clicks west of here. She scanned the horizon. If it's still intact, we might be able to salvage weapons, gear, maybe even comms to signal an extraction. Leo raised a brow. You mean the outpost that's probably crawling with Dren forces? Not yet, she countered. They agreed to focus on sweeping the ruins first. The outpost had been decommissioned months ago, too old to be a priority, yet too recent for them to ignore completely. If we move now, we might get there before they lock it down, she said. Leo scrubbed a hand over his face, exhaling sharply. Right, great, love a plan that relies on maybe and might. He pushed off the wreckage, slinging his pack over his shoulder and leading the way like a fearless leader. Ignoring his sarcasm, Rava set off at a steady pace, forcing herself to push past the lingering pain. The trek westward was grueling, the terrain was uneven and scattered with debris from past battles. The air was thick with the remnants of ash and oil, the lingering ghosts of war embedded in every piece of shattered metal beneath their boots. She could feel the weight of history pressing in from all sides, memories of missions where she had never been alone, where she had moved with a unit, where she had executed orders without hesitation. It felt strange to be moving like this now, with only a human at her side, a human who was not a superior officer, not a mission objective, not an asset to be deployed. He was something else, something undefined, something she didn't have a protocol for. Halfway to the outpost, Leo suddenly grabbed her arm, yanking her behind a half-buried transport husk. She reacted on instinct, nearly slamming him to the ground before she registered the urgency in his grip. He wasn't attacking, he was warning her. Then she heard it, the unmistakable roar of Dracen aerial scouts, their engines low and guttural, hovering in the distance. Rava tensed, muscles coiled like a predator ready to strike. Her eyes locked onto the faint blue glow cutting through the night. There were 3 of them, sleek, predatory, scanning the area with high-powered sensors. If they picked up any trace of movement or heat, they were dead. Leo's breath was steady beside hers as he slowly released her arm after his grip had tightened briefly. Without a word, his eyes met hers in a silent question, do we fight or do we run? Rava decided in an instant. She moved fast, grabbing his arm and pulling him lower into the wreckage, pressing them both against the cold metal to shield them from the drone's direct line of sight. It wasn't perfect. If the scouts lingered too long, they'd pick up the residual heat signature from their bodies, but moving now would guarantee detection. They had to wait. Leo didn't argue. He followed her lead, his body tense but controlled, his breathing low and even. She could feel the warmth radiating from him, the steady thrum of his heartbeat, too close, too loud in the silence between them. For a brief, absurd moment, she became hyper-aware of how close they were, his arm brushing against hers, his body half-curled into hers as they stayed still. It was nothing more than necessity, a survival tactic, and yet she didn't move away. When the scouts finally passed, she could sense Leo's gaze lingering on her, unspoken words on the tip of his tongue, but he said nothing. Instead, he gave a small nod, pushed himself up first, and scanned the area before offering a hand to her. She stared at it. She didn't need his help, but she took it anyway. They moved again, faster this time, closing the remaining distance between them. In the abandoned outpost, the building was half collapsed, its outer walls lined with cracks from previous skirmishes. Time had not been kind to it, but Rava didn't need it intact, she just needed the underground cache to still be there. Leo exhaled as he took in the ruins. So, tell me, we didn't risk our asses getting here for nothing. Rava ignored his sarcasm, stepping forward. Stay close, she said, and for once, he didn't argue. The outpost was a graveyard of old battles, its walls riddled with scorch marks and its structures half-collapsed from years of neglect. Once a strategic checkpoint and vital supply hub in the war, now it was nothing more than a skeleton of its former self. Cautiously, Rava moved through the rubble, scanning the dark corners and listening for any shifts in the air. Although the Dracen had not yet secured the place, that didn't mean they wouldn't. They were racing against time, and she could feel its weight on her shoulders like a countdown to an inevitable fight. Leo followed close behind, his steps careful yet deliberate, his rifle at the ready, though he had yet to fire a shot in their time together. He wasn't like the soldiers she had known, those who took pleasure in bloodshed. Leo was a survivor, a man thrust into war not because he wanted to fight but because he wanted to save lives. She didn't quite know what to make of that. All her life, she'd fought alongside warriors bred for destruction, soldiers who lived and died on the battlefield. Leo didn't fit that mold, he was different. She hated how he could slip into the main structure, the air thick with rust and decay, and still remain unflinching. The underground cache should still have been there, buried beneath what was once a command center, but war was unpredictable. Rava knew better than to assume it had survived untouched. If the Dracen had gotten to it first, they'd be wasting precious time. She knelt near the center of the room, pressing her palm against the dust-covered floor as she searched for the faint indentation signaling a concealed hatch. Abandoned too long for electronic locks to function, the outpost meant she would have to force it open manually. That's fine, I was built for breaking things, she murmured. Leo crouched beside her, watching as she ran her fingers over the ground. "You sure this is the right spot?" he asked. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she focused on the small, nearly imperceptible groove beneath her fingertips. "Found it," she said quietly. She dug in, tightening her grip before pulling. The metal groaned in protest at first, but Ravo was stronger than most things. With a sharp exhale, she ripped the hatch open, exposing the darkness beneath. Leo let out a low whistle. "Reminding me not to get on your bad side?" She ignored him, peering into the hole. The cache was still there, a reinforced supply container nestled in an underground compartment, untouched. Relief flickered through her, but she forced it away. They weren't safe yet. She jumped down first, landing gracefully in the confined space, and began unlatching the locks inside, exactly what she needed: weapons, tactical gear, and most importantly, a functioning comm unit. Before she could secure the comms, Leo dropped down beside her and grabbed it. His brows furrowed as he tested its weight, flipping a few switches. The screen flickered weakly, the power reserves were dangerously low, but it worked.